Shri Swaminarayan Bhagwanani Jai. While we carry on with the Jivan Charitra classes, we're looking at part 1. Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Gondal preparing for the Yogiji Maharaj's Janma Jayanti Amrut Mahotsav celebrations. We're looking at I-13. So while Swami Shri was working there day and night, trying to resolve the water issue, we discussed how there was how Swami had actually requested that we want to bring the water from the bore, and there was a whole discussion of where to arrange the meeting, and the fact that there was a scarcity of water at that time. So they eventually decided that they wanted to hold a meeting in Gondal. Obviously, Pramukh Swami Maharaj had to very respectfully talk to everybody and convince them that it is Yogiji Maharaj's wish to hold the Samayo in Gondal. And then as a result, it was finally decided to do it in Gondal. Nevertheless, Swami very tirelessly was working day and night, trying to help out with the festivities and preparations for it. Now, obviously, the issue regarding the water was a genuine issue. And while they were doing this, a young son of a political leader, he suddenly barged in to the room, swinging with a hockey stick. And he asked Swami Shri, and he said that, "Swami, what's the problem?" And Pramukh Swami Maharaj explained the situation regarding the water crisis. And so immediately this young gentleman, very proudly said that, "Swami, give this responsibility to me. I will make sure that I intimidate and even threaten, if necessary, even beat the municipality members, but I'll make sure that the water reaches here." So he was obviously threatening with a little bit of violence as well. And at that time, there was a lot of water in one particular well in Gondal. So the youth was actually suggesting that he could force the local members to give them as much water as we required at that time. And obviously, considering his influence, it seemed that it was likely that he could actually make those arrangements. Now, everyone else thought it was a good idea, but Pramukh Swami Maharaj objected, and he explained to him, "Listen, Bapu, one should not do that. We can't use violence to make such things happen." And Bapu wasn't, this young lad wasn't too impressed, or he wasn't too happy with Pramukh Swami Maharaj's response, and so he actually walked away. But after he left, everybody told Pramukh Swami that, "Swami, you should have said yes to him. At least it wouldn't even have been our responsibility. He was going to take care of it. Let him take the responsibility, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. If he's going to deal with all the headache, let him." But then Pramukh Swami Maharaj explained to everyone. He said, "Look, the members of the municipality, they're doing whatever they can to help us meet our demands. And if we collaborate with them accordingly and keep them happy, that'll become our seva, because they're already trying, because they need to supply it to the rest of the city as well." And so Swami's way of working obviously reflected his honesty, his integrity, the ethical character that Pramukh Swami Maharaj had. He would never endorse a wrong approach, nor did he ever entertain a wrong person even. Yes, the water problem was definitely troubling Swami Shri, and it was also true that if that young man had tried, he would have accomplished the task in such a way that Swami wouldn't have to worry about anything. And moreover, the water availability would have safeguarded the arrangements for the entire celebrations. Not to mention that, Bapa's image was at stake if there was no water. But despite all these difficulties, Pramukh Swami Maharaj's approach to this situation, it resulted in a very, it wasn't a result-centered approach, it was more on a principle-centered approach. And this is what Pramukh Swami Maharaj's sadhuta was all about. So that's a very nice incident in that chapter over here. As we move on to I-14. Now, it wasn't just the water that was an issue. Parallel to the festivities, Swami Shri also had the responsibility of the construction of the Gurukul, which was across the road. Now, the fall of the terrace slab, we discussed it in the last session, the slab had actually fallen just a few months previously, made it almost impossible to get the construction completed on time. And so the flooring of the Gurukul prayer hall on the second floor, that was handled by a Haribhakt by the name of Yogiji of Mumbai. Now, once during an inspection around the Gurukul, Pramukh Swami Maharaj would often make his rounds over there. And Swami then inquired to Yogiji, and he said, "Look, how's the work progressing?" And Lauji Bhai then explained to Swami, she said, Swami, the skin of the laborer's hands has actually peeled off because of moving all the tiles upstairs. And so for the last few days, they're unable to work and cannot move the tiles upstairs anymore. Immediately, Pramukh Swami Maharaj jumped in. He said, look, let's go. I'm coming. And then without saying anything else, Pramukh Swami Maharaj himself just started lifting the piles. He took about 12 piles on his own head. He climbed up the stairs, loaded them onto the second floor and started coming down again. Lauji Bhai noticed, so did all the laborers. They couldn't believe what had just happened. Pramukh Swami Maharaj was running the whole festivities. He was in charge of all this, the chief convener at that time. And yet he's, jumping in to help everybody out. And so, obviously for Pramukh Swami Maharaj, it wasn't beyond him. He took this in the stride. And as soon as everybody found out, they rushed to Swami Shri. They pleaded him and they said, look, Swami, stop. Everyone else then began moving the tiles onto the second floor. Once again, the work resumed very smoothly. Eventually, everything was ready. In fact, the floor was ready enough to even be used for accommodation for the festivities. So again, Pramukh Swami Maharaj's leadership style, it wasn't like, it was a very all-inclusive approach. He wasn't someone to just order people to get things done. Let's move on to I-15. Now, just a few days prior to the Amrit Mahotsav celebrations, Siddheshwar Swami had actually traveled to Rajkot to purchase some cloth to cover the Sabha Mandap. And it must have been around 1:30 a.m. when he returned, so it was pretty late. And on returning, he noticed that Devcharan Swami and Harshad Bhai Chawda, who was another yuvak in seva at that time, they were still awake. And so seeing them awake in the middle of the night, he actually asked, he says, why haven't you slept? Why are you still awake? And they responded by saying, we're waiting for you. And he goes, why are you waiting for us? And Siddheshwar Swami asked, why are you waiting for me? And the Santos responded saying that, look, Pramukh Swami Maharaj has instructed us to make sure we keep some food for you, make sure that tame jamilo, you're also well fed. And that's why he kept some food aside for you as well. And it's very interesting to see how, despite so many activities going on, even for, the Santos and the Hari Bhaktos, he would make sure that even though they were busy in seva, he was there to make sure that he took care of each and every one of them. Let's move on to I-16. We can imagine that Gujarati ma kehvaય છે ને કે સારા કામમાં 100 વિઘ્ન. There's always going to be some sort of obstacles that will keep coming when you start a project like this. Now, during the Amrit Mahotsav preparations, Pramukh Swami Maharaj actually approached a Hari Bhakt by the name of Dayabhai, who's from a village called Devchadi. Now, he was serving in a small area on the Mandir farmland at that time. And so Pramukh Swami Maharaj then informed him that, look, this time there is a shortage of water, and in addition, there will be more water usage during the festivities. So it will not be possible to supply water for farming. And so he requested to Dayabhai that, sow the crops accordingly, just so that we can manage it accordingly. The whole objective was to save water. And Pramukh Swami Maharaj's point was absolutely valid. But Dayabhai, he thought that Pramukh Swami Maharaj, he's not offering attention to my department, he's not supporting me in my farmland. He wasn't too happy, and in the middle of the preparation for the festivities, he dropped everything and he went back to his village. Now, Yogi Bappa heard about this. And so, he had a meeting with Pramukh Swami Maharaj, and he said to Swami Shri, look, we've lost a farmer, who was actually helping us on the farmland. And so Pramukh Swami Maharaj explained to Yogi Bappa the actual situation that had actually happened. But I think, it's safe to say that at that time, Yogi Bappa actually wanted everyone to see Pramukh Swami Maharaj's Guru Bhakti. And so he told Swami Shri, he instructed Pramukh Swami Maharaj to leave immediately for Devchadi to convince Dayabhai and bring him back. Now, amidst all the preparations and the celebrations that were taking place at that time, Pramukh Swami Maharaj was assigned a task which seemed pretty menial, but by Yogi Bappa's, because it was Yogi Bappa's Agna, Pramukh Swami Maharaj was told to go back, convince Dayabhai, and then bring him back. And obviously, because it was Yogi Bappa's Agna, very happily Pramukh Swami Maharaj took on the responsibility. Pramukh Swami Maharaj went to Devchadi, to this village, and then he requested Dayabhai, he says, look, come back to Gondal, there's still a lot of work, and we'll resolve everything. But Dayabhai was so obstinate, he just wasn't ready to listen. Adashiyan Swami writes it very nicely that Dayabhai, Adi you say Dayanata. He wasn't according to his name. Pramukh Swami Maharaj spent an entire day very patiently just pleading and trying to explain to Dayabhai to come back to Gondal. And then eventually he managed to convince him and bring him back to Gondal. But I think we can just imagine that amidst such responsibilities, Swami spent a whole day just in the middle of the festivities. આટલા બધા પ્રોજેક્ટ ચાલતા હોય અને એની વચ્ચે પછી આવું કરવાનું હોય, it can be pretty irritating. But again, this was Pramukh Swami Maharaj, and we can see that Swami led this very nicely. Let's move on to I-17. Now, obviously, because of the festivities, people had come from all over to try and help out. And the sadhus who were actually studying in Mumbai, they also came to Gondal to help in some of the various sevas of the festivities. They helped very diligently. They were working very, very hard in all the different departments. But obviously, naturally, during work, you take certain breaks as well. So during breaks, they would all gather with some of the department volunteers for refreshments. And Pramukh Swami Maharaj, would often notice these young sadhus taking a break and enjoying these refreshments with the department members as well. But never did he ever moan or make a comment. Despite the time sensitivity of these events, but Pramukh Swami Maharaj never moaned or made a comment about why they're taking a break. He just let them carry on with their seva, and he carried on doing his own seva. In fact, Mahant Sai Maharaj writes in one of in his book that many leaders have an extremely repulsive habit of working by shouting. All too often, they resort to shouting as if to prove their authority and superiority. I distinctly remember that during Yogiji Maharaj's Amrit Mahotsav in Gondal, Swami Shri handled every department single-handedly. Yet, never once did I notice him tense, upset, or angry. And this is what separates Pramukh Swami Maharaj's leadership from so many of us, the way we handle situations as well. So it's very interesting and very inspiring lesson to learn from Pramukh Swami Maharaj's life. Let's move on to I-18. Now, as a prelude, the festivities had just started. Now, as a prelude to the Amrit Mahotsav, Pramukh Swami Maharaj inaugurated the Amrit Nikunj, which was a 5-day exhibition prepared by the santos that had come from Mumbai. The exhibition was it very beautifully depicted the life and work of Shriji Maharaj and the Guru Parampara. Almost 40,000 people were recorded to have seen this exhibition back then. Now, Yogiji Maharaj arrived in Gondal on the 2nd of June. Swami Shri had arranged a grand welcome for Yogi Bapa at the train station, which was near the Patel boarding place. And then Swami brought him to the mandir in an open car at that time. Now, during the welcome sabha, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, he honored Yogiji Maharaj with a garland and greeted him on behalf of all the Hari Bhaktos in his welcome address. And during the first program of the festival, Pramukh Swami Maharaj offered his very heartening welcome to everybody. And you can read it in English, but I'll say what Swami said in Gujarati. કે ખરેખર આપણે મહાન ભાગ્યશાળી બન્યા છે. We are very, very fortunate કે આ અપૂર્વ ઉત્સવ યોગીજી મહારાજની હાજરીમાં આપણે ઉજવીએ છીએ. We can do it in the presence of Yogi Bapa. ઘણાની જન્મજયંતિ ઉજવાય છે, પણ તેમાં પ્રત્યક્ષ હાજરી એ ગૌરવનો વિષય છે. It is a huge matter of huge honor and pride that we can have Yogi Bapa amidst us to celebrate such festivities. શાસ્ત્રીજી મહારાજ કહેતા કે હું તે યોગી ને યોગી તે હું. શાસ્ત્રીજી મહારાજના જેણે દર્શન કર્યા છે, જેને મળ્યા છે તેવું જ દર્શન સુખ યોગીજી મહારાજ દ્વારા મળી રહ્યું છે. આવા ને આવા પ્રસંગો ઉજવવા સ્વામીશ્રી ઘણા વર્ષો આપણી વચ્ચે રહે તે પ્રાર્થના. What a nice prayer. Then let's just pray that Yogiji Maharaj can remain with us for many, many years so that we can continue celebrating such events. And also he goes on to say that, Shastriji Maharaj and Yogiji Maharaj are the same. So we can see that Yogi Pramukh Swami Maharaj is also talking about the Mahima of Yogi Bapa during this address. Let's move on to I-19. Now, on the day of the festival, a very interesting incident took place. Yogiji Maharaj, they celebrated this festival with great enthusiasm at that time. So many Hari Bhaktas had gathered at that time. Now, during that festival, it was decided that, once the festivities were over and the sabha was over, everybody dispersed. The sadhus who were in Yogiji Maharaj's seva were supposed to go back to the accommodation and make sure they had lunch and their meals prepared for Yogi Bapa. Unfortunately, they got stuck in the crowd, and so they got there pretty late. And when Yogi Bapa came back to the accommodation, he noticed that the sadhus were still not ready, that lunch wasn't ready. And without making a fuss or anything, Yogi Bapa quickly said to the sevaks, look, bring the vegetables, I'll do the cutting and bhaji todwani hoy ne. So he got involved in that. So bhaji Yogi Bapa todi, he got there and started helping with the kitchen preparations. Now at that time, a very renowned Gujarati poet by the name of Dula Kag, he had come and he wanted to just make sure he got a chance to say his farewell to Yogiji Maharaj. So he couldn't get a chance to meet him in Sabha, so he decided to come back to Yogi Bapa's accommodation. He came to Swami's room and didn't notice Yogi Bapa there. So immediately he walked out and then he met Pramukh Swami. And he asked Pramukh Swami, he goes, where's Yogiji Maharaj? I came to see him, but he's not in his room. And Pramukh Swami said, he must be in his room. And so then Pramukh Swami Maharaj escorted Dula Kag to Yogi Bapa's room. And there they saw Yogi Bapa sitting there on the floor with all the other santos, just helping prepare the meal. And Dula Kag was so astonished to see this, absolutely shocked that, here we have Yogi Bapa sitting on the main stage, amidst so many Hari Bhaktos, and yet this same Yogi Bapa is sitting on the floor just with everybody else like this. He wrote a kirtan based off this, ke jogida ne jua gaya tha, jonara jadpana. That I went to see Yogi Bapa, but even I was entranced by Yogi Bapa's, the way he did his seva like this. And so it's a very nice incident. Pramukh Swami Maharaj would often talk about this prasang, but never once did he mention that it was I who introduced or took Dula Kag to Yogi Bapa. He always kept himself away from him. But again, a very remarkable prasang in the way that Dula Kag was so impressed with Yogiji Maharaj. So this is a very nice prasang that we get to see over here. Let's move on to I-20. Now, a grand procession took place the day before the main festivities. And Yogiji Maharaj was seated in a chariot, which was very artistically decorated as a majestic peacock. Pramukh Swami Maharaj sat a little bit below Yogiji Maharaj on the right-hand side, and then Nandaji, who was also there, and he was sitting on the left side of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And then Puja Sant Vallabh Swami and Puja Mahan Swami Maharaj, they were also there sitting on the same decorated peacock, the chariot, but they were sitting on the lower part in front of Yogiji Maharaj. And on the 5th of June 1967, that was the Amrut Din, the actual day. The day which Swami Shri had worked so hard for throughout so many months. It was the day of Yogiji Maharaj's Amrut Mahotsav, his 76th birthday, which was the 5th of June 1967. Pramukh Swami Maharaj addressed the assembly and spoke about the Mahima of Yogi Bapa and the benefits of doing such festivals. He talked about how important such festivals are, the importance of Yogiji Maharaj, the Mahima of Yogiji Maharaj. And then eventually, he ended by saying that I pray to Maharaj, Swami and Shastriji Maharaj for such a Satpurush to remain with us for such a long time. On this occasion, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then announced a very substantial financial donation for the Gujarat Drought Relief Fund. And for the people of Gondal, he did it very symbolically by gifting a bag of wheat to the Minister of Civil Supplies, who was Sri Babubhai at that time. And then Swami Shri gifted the souvenirs to all the distinguished guests at that time. A total of almost 3,582 volunteers from approximately 136 villages had readily served during the grand celebrations at that time. There was also good media coverage at that time for the event. Radio outlets such as the All India Radio had also covered the event in such detail. So it's interesting, when we look at, currently we're reading Pramukh Swami Maharaj's time in 1995 when he was in London. And, many of us were witness to the way we did the celebrations over here, the media coverage and all that. But to think that in 1967, Pramukh Swami Maharaj had also done this for his Guru's celebrations is an incredible and very interesting fact to know. Let's move on to I-21. So after the festivities were over, Swami Shri immediately got involved in the wind-up seva for the occasion. And it took almost 10 days to sort out everything. And then after that, on the 16th of June 1967, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then visited Dr. Gulab Rai Sampat's clinic for a dental appointment. An upper left tooth had been paining him for quite a while. And so this was the tooth that was removed. In fact, this was the first time that Bapa visited a dentist to have his tooth removed. Swamiji then visited Virpur, where he met Girdhar Bapa, who was the spiritual successor of Sri Jalaram Bapa. When Swamiji tried to have a certain amount of cash donated through the devotees to the alms house, which Girdhar Bapa, which was there in the ashram at that time, Girdhar Bapa refused to accept the contribution, and he said, "Look, Swami, you're also doing seva. I can't take your donation." And with these words, he expressed great affection for Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Again, very interesting to see how, Pramukh Swami Maharaj always was at the forefront of interfaith, not just interfaith, but even religious leaders and spiritual leaders getting together and working together in harmony. After the celebrations were over, Yogiji Maharaj eventually then came to Sarangpur for a parayan that had been organized for almost 400 Hari Bhaktos who had traveled from Africa. And a few days after the parayan, the Hari Bhaktos then requested, Yogiji Maharaj was in Sarangpur at this time, and Pramukh Swami Maharaj was still obviously in his Vicharan. But the Hari Bhaktos from Africa then requested Yogi Bapa, okay, Swami, Sarangpur is Pramukh Swami Maharaj's place. It would be nice if we could call him for the conclusion of the parayan. So then Yogiji Maharaj sent a message to Swamiji. Pramukh Swami Maharaj was in Gondal at that time and requested Pramukh Swami Maharaj to come to Sarangpur. So as soon as Swamiji received the message, immediately he prepared to leave for Sarangpur. This was around 5:30 p.m. that same day. The reason I'm giving the time is so we can understand how the rest of the prasang actually unfolds. So it's 5:30 p.m. that same day. 5 other sadhus who were there from Mumbai and 2 other sadhus who had just been initiated during the Amrit Mahotsav, they requested to Pramukh Swami Maharaj that, can we also join you? So then Swamiji suggested that, they come the next day by train. And he mentioned that the car is pretty small, it'll become very congested, you will find it very uncomfortable. And so Swami was obviously looking out for the new sadhus who were with him at that time. But obviously the young sadhus were also very enthusiastic. They wanted to spend some time with Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And they also wanted to get there early to get Yogi Bapa's darshan. So they asked again. And they said, "Look, Swami, don't worry about us. It won't matter to us. We'll be fine." And so obviously Pramukh Swami Maharaj agreed. Now all 9 of them, they somehow managed to adjust themselves and sat in Manibhai Nanani's jeep. So it was a jeep. And so they got him in the car. They got all of these people into the car, 9 of them. As soon as Hakka Bapu saw the jeep, we can see a nice image of Hakka Bapu on the screen. Hakka Bapu was a very close friend of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Again, they had a very friendly relationship between the two of them. But as soon as Hakka Bapu saw the jeep, he got very upset. And he goes, "How are we going to get into this piece of junk?" And he had already had some experience with this jeep. Because during the preparations for Yogiji Maharaj's Amrit Mahotsav, this is the jeep that they had used for the preparations for 3 months. And so Hakka Bapu had good experience of this particular jeep. But Swamiji was obviously very, very calm. If anybody came, with full anger, Pramukh Swami Maharaj had a very incredible ability to just be very, very calm and tame the person that would come across so angrily. So Pramukh Swami Maharaj was very, very calm. And he said, "Look, what does it matter which car we're going? You just want to get from A to B. So we're going to get there anyway. So why worry?" So their journey began from Gondal around 5:30. Around 6:30, between 6:30 and 7 p.m., they crossed Dhasa. And they reached the banks of the river Kalubar, the river actually flowed in full upstream because of the heavy rains that had come. And as soon as they got to the banks of the river Kalubar, suddenly it started to rain. And the jeep got stuck. It began to rain. The water was dripping into the jeep at that time. Sorry, the water started dripping into the jeep. So again, Hakka Bapu got upset. He goes, "See, where are you going to go now? I was saying that we should leave early around 4 p.m. I've been yelling, let's leave. But you have to worry about everybody." He's telling Pramukh Swami, "You have to worry about everybody. And on top of that, you've packed so many of us into this little car over here. I can barely breathe." It must have been interesting to see the conversation between Hakka Bapu and Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And he goes, "What are you going to do now?" Pramukh Swami goes, "Let's wait a while. The water will recede." Obviously, they had to wait till the water receded. And Swamiji then and while they were waiting, Pramukh Swami Maharaj had a bathroom emergency. So he told the sadhaks, he told the sevaks, "Look, I need to go to the bathroom." So the sevaks were worried. He goes, "Where are we going to go now? It's getting dark over here. Let's just wait. We can go to Gadra. It's only about 10 or 12 kilometers away. But while they were saying this, Pramukh Swami Maharaj obviously very quickly changed his clothes. It was an emergency. He got out of the car. He walked to a distance in the rain, and after he was done, he came back. And obviously, he had to take a bath. So he sat on the riverbank and took a bath over there. Came back, he changed his clothes again in the muddy riverbank. Just, we can see the difficult times that Swami was going through at this time. The rain was relentless at this time. Then they saw a man coming towards them in the rain. Pramukh Swami Maharaj asked him, he goes, Bhai, when's this water going to recede? And the man goes, oh, it may not even subside by this morning. It has rained very heavily upstream. It seems that you will have to turn back. And Swami goes, turn back where? We want to go to Sarangpur. And so the man goes, look, Swami, you'll have to take the route via Bhavnagar. And that's how you can get to Sarangpur via Valbipur, Barwada, etc. Hakka Bapu was completely infuriated at this time. He goes, now what are we going to do? Now what? Shall we just sit down? And Swami was very calm. He goes, look, regardless of the route, let's just start and we'll get there. And only when such instances happen do we realize the importance of labh. Like Yogi Bapa no labh lewa jawana chhe ne. According to that, that's what Pramukh Swami Maharaj was referring to. It was around 12:30 a.m. This is how late it had become by the time they got to Barwada. Pramukh Swami Maharaj was only 14 kilometers away from Sarangpur. But the route was so bumpy, the stone road, Hakka Bapu was fuming. And, and then Swami, he said to you, these poor new sadhus, they've come to take labh. They're getting knocked around. You're the president of the Sanstha. Do you really need to travel by wandering around like this? How can this be possible? And Swami goes, look, Khambada is again very encouraging. Look, Khambada avi gyu che. We'll get to Sarangpur in no time. When they go to Khambada, they had to stop the car because there was another river flowing, a little streamlet that was flowing over there on the outskirts of Khambada. So Swamiji then stepped out of the car, very slowly wading through the knee-deep water at that time. He reached the other side of the stream, and then he started directing the car to come forward. And he goes, look, agar aujo, it should be okay. So the driver brought the car forward very carefully, but halfway through the car got stuck. It ran out of diesel. It just sounds like that everything's going wrong at this time. In the middle of the stream, the car runs out of diesel. I think we can only imagine Hakka Bapu at this time. He blew it completely. He goes, look, we're stuck now in the middle of the night. Then he goes, Bapa, you stay here. Who's going to call? Swami goes, let's call a bus or so. Let's get some sort of a transportation to come over here. Hakka Bapu goes, Atyare kon avanu che at this time? When he was finished, then Swami calmly said, look, Darbar, what should we do now? Darbar goes, Ye tame jano, it's up to you now. Swami goes, okay, to the Darbar. You stay here, I'll take the luggage, we'll make our way to Sarangpur, and then we'll send a tractor for you. At 2:30 a.m., they started to walk to Sarangpur. Hakka Bapu suggested that they should call a cart. And Bapa goes, look, Sarangpur is just around the corner, we'll just make it over there. One of the newly initiated sadhus who was there as well, he curiously inquired, he goes, Swami, what route is this? Finally, Pramukh Swami said, look, let's just make our way there. They got to Sarangpur at 3:30 a.m. that morning. Pramukh Swami Maharaj knocked on the gates of Sarangpur Mandir. Jivabai, who until recently was there in Sarangpur, he opened the gates and he was very surprised to see Pramukh Swami Maharaj. He goes, Narayan Swami, at this hour? And eventually they all got ready. Yogi Bapa in the morning was just beginning his Mangal Pravachan and remembered Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And he says, has Pramukh Swami Maharaj arrived? And then at that time, Pramukh Swami Maharaj knocked on the door. He walked in. He goes, Bapa, hu avi gyo chu. Seeing him, Yogi Bapa was so happy. And he says, oh, ho, ho, ho. Ato Swami avya. Swami meaning, ato Shastriji Maharaj avya. Akhi raat tamari vaat joi che. We've been waiting for you all night. Kai taklif to nathi padi ne? What a question to ask. Kai taklif to nathi padi ne? Despite all this. And then Swami obviously said, na Bapa, kai taklif nathi padi. Which is again very typical of Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Never reaching out for people's sympathy at that time. Let's move on to I-23. So from Sarangpur, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then went to Gadada. He did a Parayan on the Hari Lila Kalpataru at that time. Again, the Parayan was organized by devotees of Africa. While he was in Gadada, Pramukh Swami Maharaj received some very sad news about Mota Swami passing away. So immediately he left for Gadada. He left Gadada to go to Atladra. And Swami left around 3 a.m. because they wanted to perform the final rites as well. Mahan Swami Maharaj, Puja Kothari Swami, they had also arrived from Mumbai at that time. Pramukh Swami Maharaj performed the final rites for Mota Swami, and then he carried on with his vicharan. he made his way to Devchadi again on the 14th of July with Yogiji Maharaj for the Murti Pratishtha of the new mandir over there. Now Chaturmas had begun. We know that our Chaturmas has also begun over here in London at this time with Devpadi Ekadasi. So Yogiji Maharaj then gave Agna to Pramukh Swami. Pramukh Swami Maharaj took Yogi Baba's Agna to do his niyam, in which Pramukh Swami Maharaj did a Dharna Parna. That was the vrat that he was doing. So he did Dharna Parna at this time. And then he made his way to Bochasan to celebrate the Guru Punam festival. On the 21st of July, the annual managing committee meeting took place at that time. And it's at this time that Pramukh Swami Maharaj appointed Puja Mahant Swami Maharaj as a trustee of the Sanstha in place of Puja Mota Swami. Mahant Swami Maharaj was only 34 years old at that time. Let's move on to I-24. Now there was a time, during this time, there was a group of individuals that began to speak and write very ill words of Bhagaji Maharaj. And the reason they were doing this was trying to highlight the significance of Jaga Swami. Now Pramukh Swami Maharaj found this very inappropriate. And so to address this, he penned a letter to one of the individuals who was involved in this activity. And the letter was, pretty straightforward and simple, but also very, very frank and very powerful. Now I'm going to read the Gujarati version of it. You can read the English version on the screen. And Swamiji writes, Vishesh, જ્ઞાન પ્રકાશમાં જે લખાણ કરેલ છે તેથી પૂજ્ય યોગીજી મહારાજ તથા મને તથા આખા સત્સંગ સમાજને ખૂબ દુઃખ થયું છે, કારણ કે આપે જે ભાવથી લખેલ છે તે આપનો ભાવ તથા આપનો આશય ખોટો છે. વેરી વેરી ફ્રેન્ક. આપે પૂજ્ય ભગતજી મહારાજ માટે જે આધાર ટાંક્યા છે તેમાં કેવળ દોષ ભાવથી જ ટાંક્યા છે. વાત જે લખાય છે તે કયા ભાવે લખાય છે તે આપે જ વિચાર કરવાનો છે. જો કે આવા લખાણોથી આ સંસ્થાને કે તેવા મહાન પુરુષોને આંચ આવવાની નથી. તે તો ધૂળ ઉડાડનારને જ સહન કરવાનું છે. અને આવા પ્રયત્ન કરી આ સંસ્થા કે તેના પુરુષોને ખોટા દેખાડવા પાડવા પ્રયત્ન કરશો તે તો જીભ કાપવા જેવું છે. પૂજ્ય ભગતજી મહારાજનું ખોટું કરવા જતાં તમારું પણ ખોટું થઈ જાય છે. માટે એની puts a name on it, ક સાહેબ જરા ઊંડા ઉતરો, વિચાર કરો કે જેના આશીર્વાદથી આ સંસ્થા ઊભી થઈ છે તે માટે આપણા જેવા હજારો નહીં પણ લાખો પ્રયત્ન કરશે તો પણ તે સંસ્થાને જરા પણ આંચ આવવાની નથી અને હલકી પાડવાની નથી. કરનાર હલકા પડે છે પણ મોહ બુદ્ધિમાં આ વાત સમજાતી નથી. દ્રષ્ટિ તેવી સૃષ્ટિ દેખાય, કમળો એટલે પીળું દેખાય. તેમ આપ દોષ દ્રષ્ટિથી જુઓ તે બીજામાં પણ તે જ દેખાય. માટે આ બધી ખોટી ખેંચતાણ મૂકી અને રાજકીય રમતની જેમ અશુદ્ધ ભાવથી કોઈ કાર્ય ન કરતા શાંતિ અને સુખ હવે અંત અવસ્થાએ મળે તેમ કરશો. આથી અનેકના આત્માને દુઃખ ઊભું કરેલ છે પણ પહેલાં પોતે પોતાનું જોઈ બીજાને કહેવા લખવાનો પ્રયત્ન કરવો. Very nice, very strong words Swami is using over here. Again, we can see the difficult situation that Pramukh Swami Maharaj is, and he had to deal with all these kind of situations during his presidency. Again, he goes on to just finish off the letter, કે મહારાજનું પ્રમાણ આપે લીધું તો તે સત્સંગમાં તેઓનું સ્થાન શું? મહારાજનું પ્રમાણ આપે લીધું તો આ સત્સંગના તેઓનું સ્થાન શું? તેનો આપે જ વિચાર કરવાનો છે. અને તેવા પ્રમાણ લેતા તમારું લખાણ કરેલું પ્રમાણ બને છે તે તમારે વિચારવાનું છે. એ જ અસ્તુ. Again, very strong words Swami is using over here to correct something that somebody had done very wrong. The letter was read by the individual who had actually manipulated this truth at this time. He immediately realized his mistake and rushed to meet Swami Shri and again to apologize and assured him that such a mistake would never happen again. Yet another incident showing the difficulties that Pramukh Swami Maharaj had to deal with amidst such other activities that he was doing as well. Let's move on to I-25. So Swami was in Bochasan, and then from Bochasan, Pramukh Swami Maharaj went to Atladra, where he conducted another Parayan over here. Now this time it was to commemorate the passing of Mota Swami. And then eventually Pramukh Swami Maharaj made his way to Vidyanagar. Here Yogiji Maharaj had performed the Murti Pratishtha in the prayer hall of the Akshar Purushottam Chhatralay, APC Chhatralay. The following day, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then got to Mumbai with Yogiji Maharaj. Now, while they were in Mumbai, the reason for attending Mumbai was a farewell ceremony for the Hari Bhaktos of Africa. Hari Bhaktos from Africa had actually come for the celebrations. Now they were turning back to Africa. And so Pramukh Swami Maharaj and Yogiji Maharaj had come there to bid them farewell. But in the final assembly, Pramukh Swami Maharaj addressed the assembly and he made a lot of clarification regarding some very important Siddhant, explaining Sriji Maharaj's Reet and his Siddhant. Pramukh Swami Maharaj goes on to say, સ્વામી શ્રી શાસ્ત્રીજી મહારાજે ઉપદેશેલા તમામ નિયમો અને મર્યાદાઓનું પાલન કરીને શ્રી અક્ષર પુરુષોત્તમની ઉપાસના પ્રવર્તવા આ સંસ્થા શરૂ કરી છે. તેથી ઉપાસનાના સિદ્ધાંતમાં કે ધર્મ નિયમમાં કોઈ પણ ફેર પાડતા હોય તો તે ગમે તો સાધુ હોય કે મોટો હરિભક્ત હોય, પરંતુ તેમનું સ્થાન આ સંસ્થામાં હોઈ ન શકે. માટે સ્વામીશ્રી શાસ્ત્રીજી મહારાજના સિદ્ધાંતની ઉપેક્ષા કરીને જે કોઈ વર્તતા હતા તેમને માટે શ્રીજી મહારાજે ગઢડા પ્રથમ પ્રકરણના 18મા વચનામૃતમાં જે આજ્ઞા કરી છે તે અનુસાર આ નિર્ણય લેવાયો છે. In Gadra section 1 number 18, Sriji Maharaj very clearly states how to deal with such issues. સર્વકર્તા મહારાજ છે તેનું જો આપણે સમજતા હોઈએ અને મહારાજ કોઈના દોરાવ્યા કે ફેરવ્યા ફરી જાય છે એવી અજ્ઞાન ભરેલી માન્યતાઓ જો ન હોય તો જે કાંઈ સત્સંગમાં બની ગયું છે તે સત્સંગ અને સંસ્થાના હિતમાં જ બન્યું છે અને તેમાં યોગીજી મહારાજની સંમતિ અને રાજીપો છે જ. માટે દરેકે ખોટી વાતમાં ન ભોળવતા સિદ્ધાંતો ઉપર નજર રાખીને સત્સંગ કરવાનો છે. This was Swami Shri's final address to all those Hari Bhaktas. We will end today's session over here. Shri Swaminarayan Bhagwanani Jai.